Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 331, cover dated April 1996. The cover is by Jeff Matsuda, inked by John Dell. Matsuda just coming off a guest artist issue of X-Men number 49. And this is a pretty eye-catching cover. The cover caption, Iceman versus Generation X's White Queen. And this is Scott Lobdell bringing to a climax and conclusion a storyline he'd been developing since, most particularly, Uncanny X-Men 314, when the White Queen, waking up from the coma that she'd been in since Will Portacio's days on the title, way back in Uncanny X-Men 281, 2 and 3, took possession of Iceman's body. And Iceman subsequently realized that he hadn't been using his powers really at all, and was crestfallen by that and confused. And Lobdell has been building on the idea that maybe the White Queen left some mocking telepathic resonance within his psyche, or whether it's all in his imagination. And also there was the revelation in Age of Apocalypse that Age of Apocalypse's Iceman was an Omega level mutant. A version of Bobby Drake who truly plumbed the depths and possibilities of his mutation. So let's open this one up to the splash page, and we can see here that the interior art is not by Joe Madureira. Instead, it's by Brian Hitch, doing another guest artist stint on the title. The last time he was on, the title was Uncanny X-Men 323. So here he is again, just over half a year later, working on the title once more. And at this point in time, X-Force, they're in these new costumes designed, I think, by Adam Polina, who's the current artist on the title. And they've taken up residence in the X-Mansion. So there's been an explosion in Dr. Henry McCoy, aka the Beast's laboratory. We can see his hand here in the foreground. And Warpath and Shatterstar have come to rescue the Beast from the wreckage. So we've got a really cool double page spread here of the Beast coming to. And we've got other members of X-Force there, Sunspot and Boom Boom, helping put out the fire in the laboratory. So, yeah, it's pretty good work by Brian Hitch, inked by Paul Neary, and Steve Buccellado's the colorist. Looks really good. So the Beast is coming to here, and he makes a little joke. In the moment, I thought I was going to die. My life flashed before my eyes, and I was being played by Jim Carrey. So that's interesting. Kind of a little characterization insight on the Beast as a Joker. But also, at this point in time, 1996, there was a serious discussion of making an X-Men movie. And in Wizard Magazine in particular, lots of these casting calls where people would be thinking about, well, who would make a good Wolverine or who would make a good Beast. And I suppose in the wake of The Mask, maybe people thought that Jim Carrey would do a good version of the Beast, either in makeup or perhaps some CGI, like what was used in The Mask. So here we have Shatterstar and Warpath helping Beast to his feet, but Shatterstar has picked up on something that is a little bit awry or amiss. If you do not mind me saying so, Dr. McCoy, you sound a bit different, even for you. So that's interesting, because Shatterstar has twigged to the fact that this is not the real McCoy. Ho, ho, ho. Instead, Dark Beast has kidnapped his prime reality self and has taken over his place at the X-Mansion. And all of that was detailed, as noted here, in the footnote in X-Men Unlimited number 10. So this is an interloper at the X-Mansion, and he's that bit more careless, reckless than our Beast is, and hence the explosion. So there you go. And then the scene switches to New York, and Emma Frost's headquarter building in New York City. And because she's the CEO of Frost Enterprises, We get in the narrative captions here a little bit of background detail on Emma for any new readers. Though born and bred in Boston, it was here on Wall Street that a young woman parlayed a respectable family fortune into an obscene amount of money through the auspices of Frost Enterprises. While Who's Who would describe her as simply being a gifted entrepreneur, those who know her better might attribute her business savvy to the accident of her birth. That is, her genetic mutation, the ability to manipulate the minds of others. Let lesser mutants loathe and fear their powers. Emma Frost thrives on what she can do with her mind. She prides herself on knowing her enemies, her competitors, at least inside and out. But there's a surprise for her as she goes into her private office, and we see this steam, or cold as it will turn out to be, emerging, cold air emerging from the office. By the way, nice establishing shot there of the Brooklyn Bridge and looking over to Manhattan. Nicely done, and I like the way also that Brian Hitch has designed the interior of Frost's building here as well. Always giving good attention to the backgrounds and kind of furnishing the spaces in which the characters move. That's a real strength of Hitch's at this point in time, and he's only in his mid to late 20s at this time period. Now turn the page and we get another full page splash here with the title of the story, The Splinter of Our Discontent. So as she goes into her office, she sees Iceman, and he has redecorated the space full of icicles and ice slides, as you can see. Now it's interesting, when I was looking at this issue in preparation for making the review video, it seemed like the splash page here carried over onto the second page. So there's strange little tangents here from this page to this one here as well. And like I said, it was a little confusing to begin with, but this is a completely different scene happening elsewhere in the USA. But what I like here in this one, just as I was saying about the attention that Brian Hitch gives to backgrounds and furnishing a room, is he's drawn in these statues that Frost has in her private office. They don't have to be there. They're not necessary, but he's drawn them in, and obviously he found it, amusing to do so. But also it does give a sense of Frost's taste, her aesthetic, that classical aesthetic, because these are classical type statues, and we've got classical columns here as well in the interior of her office. So Iceman says to Frost, "Shut up, Emma, and sit down. We've got to talk." And as I said at the beginning of this video, this has been building for a long time. Great pose there on Emma Frost, that reverse angle. Good command of anatomy, of course, by Brian Hitch. And then here on this page, we have somewhere in the Colorado mountains. This is a building, home owned by Warren Worthington III. We'll see him on subsequent pages. But we have this little heart-to-heart continuing in this very odd coupling of Bishop and Gambit. Bishop, of course, from the moment he arrived in our timeline, suspicious of Gambit as being potentially a traitor of the X-Men, leading to their deaths, but has been spending a lot of time in recent months and issues with Gambit, and the whole question between them is whether Bishop trusts Gambit or not. So Gambit says to him, or Bishop says, Gambit, I thought I'd known everything about my world. And Gambit says, "Well, is that your version of an apology, Bishop, for never trusting me before you ever got to know me?" "Don't bother," he says. "Apologizing or trusting you? Either. You know, LeBeau, you're indeed something of a jerk. There you go, mon ami. There's something you can always count on." So I like that little kind of banterish piece of dialogue between the pair of them. But here in our foreground is the professor in his wheelchair, observing these two and thinking, who are they, Charles? I know their names, of course. Turn the page. And he continues, but there's so much about these newer X-Men that is a mystery. Certainly, I can trust my original students yet. So there's some build-up going on here in terms of the upcoming encounter with Onslaught. And it's interesting to consider how the professor's wondering about who he can trust in terms of the big revelation about who the ex-trader really turns out to be. So as I said, this is Warren Worthington's home in the Colorado mountains. And apparently Betsy's there, Psylocke is there. She's resting comfortably, so that's where she's recuperating. That's where they've gone. Angel also was injured by Sabretooth in the recent past, so he's also recovering too. And the professor says to Warren, he says, "I can't convince you to come back to Westchester." "Professor, you've the most powerful mind on the planet," responds Angel. "If you wanted to, I'm sure you could convince me of anything." And the professor doesn't like that. He says, "That was a particularly cheap shot, Warren. You know I would never use my mutant ability in such a fashion." But Warren shoots back with, "Professor, please. You're talking to me, Warren Worthington III. I was one of your first X-Men. I was there when you'd make an entire town forget we just torn up their main street fighting the Sentinels. I remember you memory wiping more than one bad guy to keep him from recalling where we lived. You want to pass yourself off as Martin Luther Xavier? Fine, but some of us know better." So that's interesting. And the professor grabs him by the arm and says, "Warren, this hostility, where is it coming from? I don't deny I've had to make some difficult choices in the past. And of course, one of those difficult choices in the more recent past was to mind wipe Magneto in X-Men 25. And that too will play its part in the revelations concerning Onslaught and the X-Trader. But I would like to think it was for the greater good. I'm sorry if you feel." So Warren then just apologizes. He says, "I'm tired, I guess. Tired of the fighting, tired of defending a world that doesn't even want us in it. Is that so wrong, sir, to just want a little time to rest?" And the professor concurs. "Not at all, son, not at all." And here we've got Gambit and Bishop rolling up behind the professor. And I like this shot of Gambit indeed. He really does look like he's cock of the walk, full of confidence. You'll be back before you know it, mon ami. And Bishop always serious. For once it seems I agree with LeBeau. Being an X-Man isn't something you can walk away from. But the man who started it all, it says in the narrative caption, who gathered the young mutants around him and formed the X-Men who trained them, he sits quietly, pondering his options. What options? Interesting stuff in this time period. And again, you can see on these 2 pages all of the details in the background that Hitch has drawn in and taken the time to do. The coffee table here with the magazines over here as well. All of the angles he's using here as well for the shots of the room where everything is in perfect perspective. Even the detail of the fire on here in the background, it's also very well done. The space really feels like one that the characters are walking and moving around in coherently. It's nicely done. A lot of work on these pages by Brian Hitch. Clearly him responding to the fact that he is his guest artist on one of the top selling comics in the industry and rising to the occasion. One other thing I want to point out as well is a criticism of his work, his anatomy, that I had in my review of X-Men Prime, because he also contributed to that, which was the first X-Men issue after the Age of Apocalypse, was that he had this strange way of drawing the heads of the characters that was kind of squash looking, especially in the case of Bishop and the Professor. And it's as if he was looking at his own work and not happy with it, because now they've got much more elongated heads there, the pair of them. So if you compare the way he was drawing these characters in X-Men Prime, in particular with their heads, he's moved away from that kind of squashed kind of almost like a squashed oval to something much more elongated for the characters, and it looks much better to my eye. So there we go. And one last thing I like here is the detail of the stubble and how Buccellato is colouring it in on Angel as well. That's nicely done too. So, and that reminds me, I moved too quickly past the credits page here. So the title of the story, The Splinter of Discontent, obviously a play on the winter of our discontent. Scott Lobdell, writer. Brian Hitch, guest pencils. Paul Neary, guest inks. Steve Buccellato, colours. And to round out the creative team, Richard Starkings and Comicraft on the digital lettering. So we're back then at Frost Enterprises in Manhattan, and here now we have really the focal point for the rest of the issue, which is this encounter between Iceman and Emma Frost that has been building for a year and a half, if not a little more actually, 314 to 331 with Age of Apocalypse in between. About almost 2 years this has been building up as a subplot. So here we're going to have the face-off between the two of them, and Iceman has changed. So Emma's here goading him, saying to him, I told you if you wanted it badly enough how to use his powers in new ways, you'd figure it out on your own, but I guess it was wrong. He says, guess again. So then she falls to the floor. What are you doing to me, she asks. Basically, I'm freezing the flow of blood to your brain. So that's nothing that Iceman would ever have done in the past, but Age of Apocalypse version of Iceman, that's the exact kind of thing he would have done. But Iceman's got a problem that's carried over from X-Men 50, which was he was injured in the battle with Post and had his chest caved in, and he's got a big hole there, and his whole concern is that he can't change back to human form. If I can't figure out how to heal these injuries, it'll mean I'm stuck in my ice form forever, he says, which means I'm through with your head games. You're going to help me whether you want it or not, whether you want to or not. So there we go. Oh, there is one more scene shift, which is just somewhere. So it looks like it is the desert in the US. And they've Scott and Jean have flown there via the Blackbird, and Scott is baffled. He says, this doesn't make sense. This is the right place where they fought Onslaught's Herald Post. And Jean says, but according to the images I see in your mind through the psychic bond we share, this entire landscape should be so much debris, but obviously it isn't. But instead it looks completely untouched, says Scott, as if no one has been here in hundreds of years. Jean, as Cyclops and Phoenix, we've faced probably every threat imaginable, from the Sentinels to the horror that was the Dark Phoenix. But this is different yet familiar. And that's an interesting phrase as well. And I honestly can't help thinking that in Onslaught, we may have met the one threat we can't possibly hope to stop. And interesting too that he mentions Dark Phoenix, which was the dark side of Jean Grey. Not this Jean Grey, but another version of her, put on by the Dark Phoenix Force, because a dark force is taking over somebody very familiar to them, and it's connected with Onslaught. By the way, great double page spread here, but I really like the technique on the clouds. I would say that Brian Hitch was using photo reference for this, but Paul Neary in the inks using a dry brush or something like that to ink in those clouds, dark clouds there. Very, very interesting artistic technique, and it looks good. And then we're back to Manhattan, and this is for the climax of the face-off between Iceman and Emma Frost. And outside you've got Banshee and Jubilee, who were asked by the professor to head along and keep an eye on proceedings just in case they get out of hand. And I like the little detail there that Banshee is smoking his pipe as well. And that is obviously happening in advance of Joe Quesada and Bill Jemas coming on board Marvel and dictating that no Marvel characters smoke anymore in the comics. So, as I said, they're just keeping an eye on things. You can see that Iceman is getting upset in there. His ice formations are smashing out the windows of Emma's private office up there. And inside he's got her pinned against the wall. And he says to her, for months now, everywhere I went, images of you kept popping in and out of my head. At first I thought it was some kind of bad mental aftertaste from having you inside my mind. Then I thought maybe you were somehow manipulating me, as if a part of you never really left. Now I don't even care, I just want my life back. So she says, believe me, you're welcome to it, Drake, because as far as lives go, frankly, yours is pathetic. As it seems that she breaks free from being pinioned against the wall and kicks Iceman to the ground. And he thinks to himself, stupid, Bobby, stupid. I should have seen that one coming a mile away. Or maybe she knew exactly what to do because she was reading my mind. And then she telepathically says to him, you were right the first time, Drake. You are stupid. So brutal stuff from Emma there. This is a really eye-catching, because I can't move on without noting it, really eye-catching design for an ad for X-Force at the time, monthly, from Xavier's School of Hard Knocks. So you've got the new costumes there on the team members. You've got some team members that go all the way back to the Rob Liefeld run, but also you've got Caliban on board now. Interesting. And then we're back to Emma playing mind games with Iceman. She manifests his father, who, of course, he has a really fraught relationship with. And his father's always expressing his disappointment in him. You're not a real man, are you, Bobby? He says, you're a mutant. But Iceman's not falling for the illusion. And he says here, the night I realized how intolerant my dad was about other people, that, father or not, a bigot is a bigot, was the moment I stopped letting his words and his disappointment define my self-image. So then she whips up an image of Opal, Tanaka, Iceman's ex-girlfriend, and she says, I guess that's what we were always about. Oh, Bobby, I was never really your girlfriend. You never loved me. You just needed me there to make you look good. But he retorts, nice try, but not even close. I did love Opal and she loved me. She left because I was too self-absorbed to recognize a good thing when I saw it. Yeah, well, it could have been magic, Bobby. And then she manifests the beast. This is all done telepathically. And he's there saying, let's have some fun. And Iceman says, you're still not listening to me. It's not going to work this time, Emma. I won't be bullied by his father. I won't be seduced by Opal or distracted by Beast or anything. I've stopped lying to myself. I'm not going to listen to your lies, anyone's lies again. I have power, maybe more than I ever thought I did. And we saw that in Age of Apocalypse. And I'm through with not living up to that potential. So she was still pinned against the wall the whole time. Everything that occurred since this page here was all in his head and manufactured by her and her telepathic abilities. And she brings him to the nub of things. If that's true, Drake, then change back to your human form. And that baffles him. You never really freed yourself. You've been there all along. Don't change the subject. Again, change back. So she's adamant and fixed on that challenge to him. And he's afraid. And then what? I die? You won't die, Drake. Turn back. I don't trust you. He says, no, you don't trust yourself if you want it badly enough. And he protests he doesn't know how. That's why I need you to show me. And she says, stop analysing everything to death. There are some things in life you can only learn by doing. Ask yourself, Drake, what if you don't try? So this is tough love from Emma Frost. Will you be able to live with yourself if you don't do it on your own? So then he does it. He transforms back to his human form and he's fine. He's all right. There's no big hole in his chest. He doesn't die. And she says to him, now, was that so hard? And this is interesting too. Look, Drake, she was about to say, but then she uses his first name, Bobby. I was helpless the day my Hellions died, and that goes all the way back to issue 281, Whilce Portacio's first issue on the series. I discovered them, trained them in my own way. I guess I even loved them. To be frank with you, when I learned how much potential you had, I was angry at you. Right or wrong, I felt, here you were all these years playing at being an X-Man, never challenging yourself to go any farther than you needed to. If I had to push you too hard to get you to realize that, I'm sorry, I guess. But he's there saying, don't apologize, it hurts, but I'm alive. I mean, in the end, I did it right. And I like the little detail here that because he hasn't turned back to his human form, when he does, his stubble has grown because he hasn't been shaving. I like that. That's nice. Yes, Bobby, you did it, she says. And the best part of all, you did it all by yourself. So interesting too that Emma's, what would I say, like teaching technique, quote unquote here, you know, it's tough, it's harsh, but it gets results. Whereas the implication is that maybe the professor didn't push Iceman hard enough to realize his potential, was too soft in many ways, didn't bring out his own darker part of himself as a teacher. Maybe that's being implied, but a dark part of the professor's coming out in this time period. So there you go. Next issue, the hunt for the all new, all different Wolverine, because Wolverine has had another transformation in the 100th issue of his title. So here we've got letters, two pages of letters. They're all about issue 328. And here we go again, an advertisement for what's coming up in the next issue of Uncanny X-Men. Hoping to discover the fate of their feral teammates' ever-mutating condition, the X-Men take off for Morocco in search of Wolverine. Little do they realize that nothing could have prepared them for what they're about to find. And indeed, Wolverine looks a little bit different after his latest mutation in issue 100 of his title. I remember at the time they were teasing, would he get his adamantium back? And that's what I really wanted to happen, and I wasn't expecting what did happen at the end of this particular issue. So there you go. I do hope that you enjoyed this review and commentary on Uncanny X-Men 331. If you did, please like the video on YouTube. It really does help the channel. If you haven't done so already, subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.